Yeah. Oh, there we go. All right.
Oh, we
This
are
is it.
live.
It's official right now. The first live version of the Coach Dev. I don't know what this is going to be called. The Coach Dev, the Knowledge Pro, the Knowledge Discussion,
Knowledge Pro Live.
Knowledge Pro Live. Let's go with that. I like this thing.
KPL.
KPL.
Knowledge Pro Live.
There we go. And I know some of you guys might have seen in some of the posts about this that it was going to be me and Kristin Bowen. Clearly, this is not Kristin Bowen with us.
No, less hair.
Yeah, less hair, not quite as good looking, but equally as prepared and intelligent in the coaching front and other fronts as well. So excited to have Mr. Sean with us. What's that?
I've got some big shoes to fill, but I'll try my best.
Oh, look at that. Kristin right there shows up in the comments right off the bat. She's not there, but she's still with us in spirit, even though
okay, there we go. Hey boys, looking good. Thanks, Kristin.
So Pete is the newest member of Best Hour of Their Day Affiliate University Coaching Development Coach. So he's been with us a couple of weeks now, diving into reviewing homework. He is getting ready to take on some of our live calls. He's going to be adding some content to the Knowledge and the Knowledge Pro as well. So, Pete, tell me more a little bit about you. How long have you been doing CrossFit?
Yeah, how long have I been doing CrossFit? I found CrossFit in 2010. So my dad had a garage gym, and I would come home. I was in university at the time. I would come home in the summers and just work out in the garage gym. It didn't know what CrossFit was. I was just following, I don't know, really anything I could get my hands on, just downloading templates, for hockey. And
what kind of garage gym did your dad just was?
Yeah, he was just into fitness. And so he was big on bench press. He was a runner, and then he would supplement his running with bench press. And so we had right?
We're exactly 3 days a week, and then I'm going to run for cardio a couple other times.
That's right. So, but he was into free weights, and he had a whole bunch of dumbbells, and we had a barbell, and it was the typical workout station with the rack, and then behind the rack was the pulley system. So you could sit down on the ground and do your pulley rows and all this kind of thing, and the lat pull down pulley from the top. So I was working out one day, and my neighbor is a firefighter, a career firefighter. And he walked over and he was like, "Hey, I think you're going to really like this website. A bunch of guys at the station are doing it. It's called CrossFit.com. I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll check it out." And so that was the beginning of it. For years, I just followed the website. I thought for 3 years, I just thought CrossFit was a website.
That's it, right?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. So that's it. That's how I found it. Yeah.
Nice. Now, so then where was the transition into coaching?
So in school, I was studying biology, but I was athletic and into sports. I was training hockey, and I wasn't a super skilled hockey player, but I was a hard worker. And so the way that I got my edge on the ice was training really hard. And so my buddies figured out that, that I was fitter than them at one point. So I started training them. Never thought of it as a career. I thought I would be, I would be studying biology or working in some lab somewhere. And then at a university, I fell into a personal training job. One of my friends from high school, who actually owns the affiliate that I currently work at, CrossFit 1855. He was working at a boutique fitness facility, and they needed trainers to run their HIIT classes. And so he asked, he's like, "Hey, you're into fitness and you used to lifeguard, right? So you can blow a whistle." I said, "Yes, check the box to both of those things." And then, so I showed up for the interview and I got the job, and that was my intro. That was my intro to fitness. I started personal training and just in coaching HIIT classes. Yeah.
So you're in the class and you're indoors blowing whistles to get people to switch stations?
It's crazy. Yeah, exactly. So the flagship offering of this gym I started at, it's called Greco Fitness, and it was a 45-minute class with 3 times around, so 3 circuits with like a quick break in between each circuit of anywhere from like 6 to 8 movements. And so we got to choose the movements as like the trainers in the place. We were like, that was where our creativity could come out. We were like, okay, we're going to choose the movements and try to make it balanced. And we'll put some cardio over here and some like weightlifting over here, and then just cycle through 3 times. And then you crank the music and blow the whistle every time they got to switch stations. And then just run around and mop floors. Like you just run around with a sweat towel and try to make sure no one hurts themselves, because you're working out on hardwood, polished hardwood. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So from there, where did you transition into like actually coaching movement, not just blowing the whistle and mopping up floors?
Well, when I got my first personal training client.
Okay.
So with that gym. So, it was such a funny, and I actually told aspects of this story at the Canadian affiliate gathering that just happened this past weekend. And I was telling my story of like how I got into fitness and stuff, and then leading into what real coaching is. And I was using that as an example of what not to do when coaching. But when I started personal training, obviously in that one-on-one environment with the music turned down, you've got an opportunity to make people better. And so, coaching people through the movements, that was after I had found CrossFit. So CrossFit was part of my own training regimen, and I was introducing that to my personal training clients, and trying to coach the movements as best as I could. And then that's when I decided basically that I wanted to make it a career, because I had just a huge impact on people's lives. I was seeing the change in people, my clients. They were telling me about how it was affecting them in their lives, and I was like, man, this is crazy. Like I need to keep doing this. It feels good to have that impact on people, and it was decent money. And I thought, okay, I can really make this a career. My background in biology kind of helped me a little bit, right? Understand a lot of the biomechanics of it, and then the physiology of nutrition and this and that. So I started to grasp it pretty quickly, a lot of the concepts. And then it was just, I'm a people person. So interacting one-on-one and in person with people, I really enjoyed that. And I thought, okay, this is much better than just being alone in a laboratory doing pipette stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So at that point, had you taken your level 1?
No, I hadn't. I had joined my first CrossFit gym in 2013, summer of 2013. So basically what had happened was my buddy, I told him about CrossFit, and then he just went hard into CrossFit. He like discovered all the gyms. He did the open, he joined a gym, he actually competed. And I'm like, what the heck is this world, this CrossFit world that you're, I was the one who told you about CrossFit, and all of a sudden, like, you're discovering things I didn't even know that existed. And I'm like, well, I better do the open. So I did the open. After that, I was motivated to join a gym. That gym, I just cold turkey quit my job at this other HIIT facility. And I was like, I'm going to bring my clients to your CrossFit gym. Let me coach. And they were just opening up. It was CrossFit NCR, which I eventually went on to become part owner. They didn't even have a website at the time. It was just like a Facebook page. And so I just transitioned there. And then they said, well, you can't coach a class until you get your level 1. I was like, okay, sounds good. So let's go to Montreal.
Were you like, I've got my whistle though, but
I've got my whistle. I've got my whistle.
You sure? I can't whistle for class.
They were trying to explain. I was so excited that they were explaining to me like how they run classes, and I had participated in classes. I was totally bought into the style, to like this, this style of, scaling like the professional coach, scaling personal training into a group environment type of thing, like truly doing it right. At this old gym, they advertised that. They're like, we're going to give you great one-on-one attention in this HIIT class. But it was so far from that. Like, it was crazy. And then you go into the CrossFit gym and I was truly experiencing that one-on-one attention. And I was totally bought in. So bought into the point where, I had a full schedule of personal training clients. I quit cold turkey, went to this other gym. Out of probably 15 to 20 clients that I had, 2 followed me. Only 2. So I was starting at like ground zero. I was committed. Yeah. So I got my level 1 and then started coaching. Yeah. 2013.
All right. So you go to your level 1, you get introduced to these 9 foundational movements. What was your thoughts on the 9 foundational movements? Were you so bought in at that point, you were just like, whatever you tell me, I'm doing? Or was there ever any like questions like, why are these the 9? What's the value of this? Ooh, I think something else that I think is really important should be part of this instead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't remember having any particular thoughts. I think my whole mindset going into that was into the level 1 was that I knew nothing about the methodology and I was ready to just learn. So I was kind of an open book absorbing it. It made total sense to me. The concept of having 9 foundational movements and then having that sort of having that base upon which you can start to build other movements, et cetera, et cetera. The concept was great. And to be honest, I was happy to learn. I was happy to learn that I didn't have to memorize a list of 150 movements, because up until that point, I'm like, this is changing every day. I can't keep up with all the different movements. It's really hard to understand like the gymnastics concepts and how it applies to the monostructural and how that applies to the weightlifting and like I remember being in my garage before I had gone to a CrossFit gym and I'm trying to do a hang power clean. I had like no idea what I'm doing. You could just, so I did my best, but I was happy to find out with the 9 foundational movements that it was more simple than I had perceived at first.
That's interesting. Like, I think I was so bought in. I didn't know anything. I'd been training like kind of similar to you and done fitness and done a bunch of different moves, anything I read in Men's Health probably at the time, or like what I'd done with trainers when I'd played sports and stuff like that. And I went and they're like, oh, these 9. And there were things like push press and push jerk, which I'd never actually done, or sumo deadlift high pulls. And I don't think I'd even done much like traditional deadlifts. So I was just like, all right, you tell me this is it. And they give you the idea that these 9 movements contain these common movement themes, and I like all that stuff just goes over my head, not only for my first level 1, but probably even for the first handful of years that I was teaching seminars. Right. Did that click right off the bat where you're like, oh, these things have these characteristics which are just concepts that will allow us to do other movements, or did it take you a while to understand that?
Oh, it took me a while to understand. Like that first experience at the level 1, like I barely remember anything from that experience. Like it's all, I'm listening and it's making sense to me, but it's in one ear out the other. Like it's so much information. Yeah, it's so much info. And I was like I was a kid in the candy shop. Like I was just sitting there smiling, like, yeah, yes. And it's like in and out. And I'm just like, okay, let's do the breakout group. This is so fun. And then I leave them like, what happened? Okay, I got my level 1. I did the test. Let's go start training people. So like, yeah, it definitely took a lot of time. It took time just working with people, like workshopping the movements in the sense of like, I'm going to be coaching people and seeing how the different movements affect people in different ways, figuring out that some are easier to learn than others, and then ultimately landing on like, oh, maybe I should use the 9 foundational movements as a starting point to teach my athletes when they first come in. Like this is maybe going to be, beneficial to me and the athlete. And then at NCR, it's funny, actually, I really, really started understanding it now that I'm talking through it. When I was part owner of NCR, we ran these classes called basics classes on the schedule that were free intro classes essentially. And the class structure was only 9 foundational movements was the specific warm-up. So every workout centered around one of the 9 foundational movements. And the first half of the class, when you got to the specific warm-up, it was always with PVC. And then you'd run people through like a couplet or a triplet with a 9 foundational movement and then 2 other very simple movements, whether it was like gymnastics or skipping or rowing or like a monostructural if it was a triplet. And so I got really, really good at teaching those movements, which was, looking back, sort of the springboard for me getting on staff and being inspired to do that on the weekends for a living. But when you do that enough, then you start to realize its benefit, like truly, right?
Yeah, I think that's where I was at too. When I started the gym I started at, it was like we were following CrossFit.com. I just was doing these movements, didn't know about the 9, anything like that. I go to the level 1, I learn about them, and then at the time I transition and move. And I'm going to a different gym, CrossFit Southside in Jacksonville, and Justin Berg, who owned the gym and was a buddy of mine that we played baseball together in college, wanted to get on seminar staff and knew that, like, hey, at the level 1, we teach these 9 movements. You do it in circles with PVC pipes. And so that's what we're going to do. And so when I started coaching, that's what I did. And so lucky for me, because my first coaching role at the gym was to do the foundations or the fundamentals, or I forget even what we called it at the time. Yeah. And it was teaching those 9 movements with PVC pipes. I knew my first task was like, I need to memorize the points of performance. I need to memorize the progressions that are in this manual thing. And that's how I'm going to teach it. I didn't know why the points of performance really were there. Like, I kind of like, that's how you do the movement, right? I didn't really understand, like, hey, we dip and hold for the push press. I want the torso upright, but I didn't, like, none of that stuff really made sense. I just knew that I needed to memorize it. And that's how I had to do this. This was the dance that I had to go through in order to teach these movements to these new people.
Right. It's almost like choreography, right? Like you're saying dance. It's almost just like it's a choreographed, exactly like you said, a dance that you're just checking the boxes and going through.
Like, I memorized my script. Well, and at the time too, I was terrified of speaking in front of people. I wasn't very good at presenting. And so I was super nervous every time I had to coach somebody. And so it's like, I memorized my script almost word for word on how I would teach everything.
Yeah.
And how I would do all of that stuff. And it was funny, like, especially at the time, like 2008, 9, 10, like when you're getting into this and you're trying to consume all the content that's out there, like, yes, I was following .com and I was like, oh, these 9 movements that we've got, the air squat, the front squat, the overhead squat, like, these are them. But then you would start reading some other blogs and they would be like, no, the sumo deadlift high pull, stupid. That's a dumb movement. It shouldn't be part of the 9. It should be replaced with a push-up, or it should be a clean pull, or it should be this thing. And I'd be like, yeah, maybe they're right. And I would start thinking, because I liked that person that I followed along, I'd be like, oh, maybe that's it. And I'd still teach these because this is how this was the requirement of teaching at the gym that I was at. But then over time, you start to understand, like I said, the concepts of those common themes. And now it's like, oh, the sumo deadlift high pull isn't one of the 9 movements because that movement trumps the other movements and it's just so superior. No, it trains the 2 things that we need for a bunch of our other movements: the quarter extremity timing, right? Legs and then arms. And it does so in a way that is not as complex with a catch position or receiving position. And then it also trains the speed that we need for our Olympic lifts and things like that. And those dots start to connect. And then you're like, oh, it's not the movement. And people are complaining about the movement. It's what's within the movement. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, cool. You want to make the argument that it should be a clean pull instead, or just a power clean instead of a sumo deadlift high pull. It's like, well, what fault shows up more often than not with somebody brand new trying to learn a power clean? Mm-hmm. Oh, they pull early? Maybe that's why we learn a sumo deadlift high pull, where the whole focus is the timing of this thing.
Mm-hmm. And I look at these 9 too, and the sumo deadlift high pull, just because we're talking about it, it's just, each of them individually, it's just a piece of the puzzle, right? You're like you're saying, you're asking yourself, what is it teaching people? And if you use the power clean as an example, the rack position, we already teach that in a number of other exercises. Why beat a dead horse when we can isolate a different and potentially more technical aspect of the movement, like the timing, like you just said, and spend a lot of time drilling and getting people working on that specific aspect of the Olympic lifts without the added complexity of rack position, or for a snatch, it would be the overhead position, right? And not to say that you can't teach people these things with other movements. It just makes it super easy. It's super easy.
Yeah, once you learn and start to understand these concepts, and then it's the same thing of like the progressions that are used. Like, people get so wrapped around what's happening there, they don't understand why. Like how many times, I don't think I hear it quite as much now, but there was so many times early on, I'd either read something or I'd see a video or I'd be at an early level 1 and somebody'd be like, I'm not going to jump in the push jerk progression. Like jumping is not part of Olympic lifting. And you're like, okay, potentially you're right, but let's understand why we're doing that. Once again, what do people do wrong? And what's the concept that we're trying to teach with a jump and a land? Oh, hip extension. Cool. Most people do that wrong. Sweet. And when we've got brand new people walking in the gym where I'm like, hey, we're going to dip, we're going to drive, we're going to press, we're going to redip, and their brain starts to melt, smoke starts coming out of their ears, and I can't get them to do any of that stuff, much less extend their hips along the way. It's like, all right, let's go ahead and take this super simple concept, have you jump and land so you can feel what it's like to extend your hips. Even if you jump, 6 inches off the ground, which is a little bit more dramatic and is not going to happen in the true Olympic lifts, you're going to understand that concept that comes from learning that movement and from learning it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just always so interesting for me. And I think that's coaching wise, I think that is so important. If you're going to coach CrossFit, you need to dive into the 9 foundational movements. You need to memorize the points of performance, the setup position, stance, grip, and body position. And then you need to memorize these teaching progressions and work on teaching it that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think you can even glean a little bit of wisdom from how we both started as trainers. Of you don't even necessarily need to understand it thoroughly to do it half decently, right? And maybe that's even just having
won't.
you won't. And so stressing about that is just going to be a huge problem, right? Like,
yeah,
just don't worry about not understanding it. Commit to doing it that way and just practice. The more you do it, then slowly over time, you're going to start to understand, hey, I'm still figuring stuff out. Like, however many years later, 13, 15 years later, whatever it is, like I'm still figuring out aspects to even just the 9 foundational movements. Like that, I'm like, oh, wow, I never really thought about it that way. And so, but that just comes from repetition of application. And on that note, one thing that I thought that you said was interesting, just tying into both of our experiences, was how we both started coaching in one-on-one or like super small group. Like when you did your foundations classes, was it 1-on-1, 2-on-1? What was it?
It depended. Like every week, like we ran, I can't remember what it was. I think it was once a week we'd run a fundamentals program, or it ended up being every 2 weeks. And so it could be anywhere from like 1 person up to like 6 or 7 people.
Right.
And things
smaller than the typical like average class size.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
For sure.
And I love that, because I'm just coming from a personal training background, and I still do personal training. And the reason I do it is, yes, I have a relationship with a couple clients and I enjoy hanging out with them and making them better. But I truly think as a developmental tool for a coach, like that's where everyone's got to start. Like you don't need to stop yourself from doing the group stuff right away. But I think that what the one-on-one or super small group environment affords you the ability to do is immerse yourself with one movement style, one anatomical makeup, one psychological response, right? Instead of many of those things, and how they react to your coaching with a couple movements, right? And you do that over and over and over and over again. Then you start to get these insights of like, oh, that's what happens when I get someone squatting really well. All of a sudden they can like land in a squat clean or a med ball clean, right? So just touching on, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I think the small groups are important. And one of the most beneficial things for me was also doing the fundamentals and the on-ramps. These people that walk in that have no experience, and I've got to figure out what to say or what to do to actually get them into the right positions. It's one thing, like once somebody's been doing some of this stuff a little while, and nowadays a lot of people will come in and they've had some exposure, some experience. But, 15 years ago, most of this stuff, not many people had done. And so working with those brand new clients as a brand new trainer, people new to the movements, helped me a ton. Now, as a current affiliate owner, the last thing in the world I'd want to do is like give my newest trainer the responsibility of dealing with my brand new athletes, right? Because this is the first experience they're going to have. I want them to have the absolute best experience. I want them with a trainer that's going to know how to put them in the right positions, know how to scale them appropriately, and do all that kind of stuff. So I would be less willing to provide that opportunity to a newer coach just because I want the experience for the athlete to be so well. But looking back, like, it was probably not the greatest thing in the world for the business, but it was the absolute best thing in the world for me as a coach to learn how to act.
But maybe they could cut their teeth on some personal training and get their own client.
Yeah.
Right? Like something like that. And that's a similar situation. And then just use even like with every single one of my new clients, if I'm going to take on a PT client, I the first 9 sessions are the 9 foundational movements, like every single time. Right. And then you build up from there. So I got a question for you, Todd. I'm given at the level 2, that we talk about the common movement themes of functional movement. And the way that we kind of pitch that at the level 2 is like, hey, memorize this list. And then you're going to be able to basically figure out the list of points of performance for any functional movement, right? Or most of them.
Yep.
And you can start to dissect, whether or not a particular progression is valuable, if it's teaching and leaning into those common movement themes. So do you think for a new coach, it's better for them to just memorize each of the 9 foundational movement points of performance? Or, for example, you got your 5 for your air squat, your 5 for your deadlift, your 5 for your shoulder press. Is it better to memorize each of those 15 individually and silo them in your head at first? Or do you think they should jump to the common themes?
Oh, absolutely. I think they just need to memorize the points of performance. I need to know that the squat needs a neutral spine, weight in the heels, hips back and down, the knees over the toes, the hip crease below the knee. Like, if they don't know that, they're not going to grasp the 8 common movement themes: midline stabilization, core to extremity movement pattern, balance about that. Like, none of that stuff, there's going to be no context there, in my opinion. And I think it would be, you would have to be at a very high level to be able to take those themes and work backwards. Be like, oh yeah, I really understand these themes. Because if you're starting there and you haven't taught the other movements, you don't know the points of performance. Like, I just don't know that those concepts will make any sense outside of the obvious, like, oh, midline stabilization, cool. I want the spine and pelvis to be one unchanging integrated unit. That makes logical sense. I don't know how that works in real life. If I've never coached somebody, I've never really looked at movement through that lens. But yeah, it makes logical sense. What's your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you. I think that it can help to understand the concepts of the common movement themes. But at first it's going to be easier to just have that memorized and then execute on teaching them the way that we both kind of started out there. Like, the way that I tell some trainers too is, hey, have a little checklist in your pocket. Like, write the points of performance on a sheet of paper, fold it up, put it in your pocket. And then every once in a while, if you forget, right, maybe it's during a workout, you're going to go check your points of performance and just say, oh, okay, yeah, the heels. Actually, maybe I didn't teach that, but I'm going to correct the crap out of it right now.
Right.
Right.
I'd be curious, anybody watching or listening, if you guys know the points of performance. I just listed the 5 for the squat. Pete already mentioned there's 5 for the shoulder press. I'd love for you guys to comment. What are the 5 points of performance for the shoulder press? Do we know those off the top of your head? How quickly can you spout those out? And I think, to Pete, your point of like having them written down on a note card at some point when you're starting your journey is not a bad thing, and double checking and looking and things like that.
Not at all.
So out of the 8 that we talk about at the level 2, right, the common movement themes, I'm trying to think of how to word this question. I want to say which one is the most important. Now, most important safety-wise is midline stabilization and loaded environment. So that's not where I'm headed. Which one do you think has the biggest impact on athletes actually hitting the rest of the points of performance or achieving the common things? And what's the thing that you think you should spend the most time on as a coach? If I'm coaching a group of athletes, I'm covering a class, out of those 8 things, which are midline stabilization, balance about the frontal plane, posterior chain engagement, core to extremity movement pattern, active shoulders, full range of motion about a joint, effective stance and grip. And then what's the last one that I'm missing here?
You said active shoulder. You said range of motion.
Yeah.
Effective stance and grip, sound hip function.
Yeah, sound hip function. There we go. Out of those 8, which one's going to have the biggest impact? Where should you spend your time?
Oh man, I feel like that's a trick question. It's a triage situation. I
disagree. I'm very passionate.
You're pretty passionate.
Anybody that's
I'll tell you what the easiest and quickest way to make large improvements is stance and grip.
If that's not right, it's almost impossible to do everything else.
For sure.
If you get that nailed, then there's only minor things that can go wrong more often than not. It's like if I get you in the right stance and the right grip, all right, cool. You might miss hip extension. Your torso might come forward a little bit on the push press, but like range of motion is probably not going to be as much of an issue. Like so many different things. The amount of time that I spend just changing people's feet and hands.
Yeah.
Probably for my athletes is like mind-numbingly, like it probably frustrates them because I'm like, all right, nope, Pete, remember feet a little bit wider. And every time we do it, nope, Pete heels out a little bit more for me. And every time you come to class, I'm saying the same thing. But like people have habits, they walk into the gym, they don't think. And if I let that slide and then I wonder why your weight's on your toes or you can't get to depth, and I'm like, oh, Pete doesn't listen to me. I kept telling him to go lower and he never went lower. And it's like, well, it's because his feet were so close that he didn't have the space in his hips to get his hip crease below his knee.
Right. I wonder if there's a linear correlation between the experience, the amount of years you spend coaching, and then the number of stance and grip changes you make in a class.
Dude.
Like the more experience you have, it just goes up. You're just constantly doing stance and grip because it's true. And then people inevitably ended up moving their feet back, bringing the hands back. And then to keep them accountable and be relentless with that, you need to constantly be making those adjustments. And then there's the experimentation part too. It's like, I can't figure out what's going on with this person. They're not getting below parallel in a squat. And then you come in and you're just curious about it. Hey, what happens if you turn your toes out? What happens if you move your feet a little wider? Okay, oh no, that made it worse. What happens if you go narrower? And then, I'm constantly having those conversations and adjustments in class. Yeah, stance and grip. I totally agree with you. The air squat. Sorry, go ahead. You were going to continue on that thread.
Oh, I was just going to ask the question of, and this is in the comments. What was the first workout that you coached? I know we had Joe mentioned deadlifts and echo bikes. Luckily, coached his family, so didn't have to worry about it. Nicole can't remember what her first one was. Do you remember the first workout that you coached by chance?
No, I don't. I wish I did. I really wish I did. I don't. I know that the first CrossFit workout I did in the garage, I don't know the exact rep scheme, but it involved running, hang power cleans, at 135, which I had to bring the weight down, obviously, and box jumps. And for the box jumps, I took a bench and I pushed it up against an old car in the lane.
An old car?
Yeah, like I pushed the bench against the car so that it wouldn't fall over when I jumped on it. And then I would jump on the bench and then the car would be like right in front of my face as I stand up. But I don't remember what the first workout I coached. Do you?
It had to have been like officially coach or CrossFit coach. It had to have been me coaching a fundamentals class where I went through the squats in the teaching portion of this thing, and then we did the old baseline, which was the 500-meter row, 40 squats, 30 sit-ups, 20 push-ups, 10 pull-ups. That was the workout in our first intro class. So that had to have been it.
Yeah.
Similar to you, I would train my buddies because I was the one like you that wasn't as athletically gifted and had to work harder. So I trained a lot. And then some of my buddies would come around there and I'd make up workouts for us to do, but I wouldn't say I actually physically coached them. Ashley's got a good question around what do you do when you have an athlete that refuses to widen their stance because they are a seasoned athlete, right? Of like, and I'm sure you've heard it the same as me, where I'm like, hey, Pete, widen your feet. And you're like, no, I squat narrow. And I'm like, oh, in my mind, I'm like, oh, good. So you like to squat crappy. Sweet. That works out well. So how do you approach that athlete?
We talked about this a little bit in the interview that you gave me about the professional coach, ask a coach segment that I wrote. It was roughly the same question. It was like, how do you coach seasoned athletes in the gym? I think it was. Yep. Well, I mean, so I'm putting myself in the position right now. I'm walking up to an athlete. I say, can you open up your stance a little bit or go put your feet wider? And they say, no. I'll probably right away, I'll probably be like, well, why don't you just try it and see what happens? Like I might just ask them, I might push back a little bit and say, well, why not? And then, and then maybe they're going to come up with a good reason, because you don't know either, right? Just always ask one more question. It's kind of my mantra there, is be curious. And if they've got some sort of injury, well, then right away, okay, well, that's legitimate. Maybe I'm not going to push them to go wider because maybe their groin hurts, and that'll open up the conversation for a different scale, because maybe you're also seeing that there's other faults that are presenting themselves because their stance is too narrow. And you're like, okay, well, if you're injured, just know that your back is also rounding right now. And maybe we should be squatting to a high box, and you're doing box squats today, instead of going to depth, because right now that stance is affecting your back, and that's also dangerous. But most people won't push back if you frame it as like, you don't have to do this, but what's the harm in trying? Because it might make you better.
Yeah, I've experienced both, right? Where I ask and people are like, no, this is how I squat. And I'm like, okay, cool. So that takes a second to like, how am I going to reapproach this thing? And I'll get to the point like where I'll be like, hey, Pete, humor me just for this session. Like as we're going through this little warm up, just do this for me.
Yeah.
And I might have that like side conversation, like, hey, your torso is going to be way more upright with that slightly wider stance, which is going to make you super efficient, like way more efficient. And I think you're going to find that it feels weird, but it's going to put you in a better position. It's going to prevent you, like you said, from rounding your back or from having that immature squat. Like, humor me. Just try that for a couple of reps or whatever, and see if I can get a little bit of buy-in there. If they keep pushing back, then it's to your point of like, ask one more question and try to understand, like, not only like what's going on, why, like, you're in here for me to coach you. Why don't you want me to coach you? And sometimes people are afraid to take like one step back in order to take two steps forward, because their score for that day matters so much that a new stance is going to change the weight or the time. Now I'm not willing to do that.
Yeah.
But this also comes to a point, like there was a post that we put up yesterday of like things that I want coaches to stop doing. And one of them is to stop asking athletes, how does that feel when you make some adjustments?
Right.
And that's the controversial one, right? And I see in the comments where people are like, oh, I disagree. People need to know their positions and they need to give feedback on how it feels. And here's the deal. It's not that we don't want our athletes to feel their positions, but when I tell you, Pete, an experienced athlete who's used to coaching or to squatting with a narrow stance, when I come and move your feet to make them wider because I know that that's a better position for you, you're going to be more upright, your back's going to be flatter, like all the rest of this stuff, and you change it because of your years or even weeks or whatever experience you have, if I ask you, how does that feel? Your response is going to be, well, it feels shitty. It feels good, right? And so if I ask that question as the coach and I'm like, how does that feel? And you're like, I hate it. It feels terrible. Well, then I've painted myself into a corner. If you tell me it feels terrible, then I kind of have to like give in and go, all right, well, I guess go back to that crappy stance and your terrible squat. Whereas if I just slightly phrase the way that I frame that and I go, hey, do you feel that? And you go, yes, it feels crappy. I'm like, I know it's because it's new and it's different. Give me a week and I promise you it's going to feel better, or you're going to get used to it and it's going to feel better. But if they're like, if I ask you, do you feel that? And you tell me that same thing, now I can respond. Now I can be like, I know it's a new position, going to be uncomfortable for a little while, but I promise it looks way better. You're going to perform better. You just have to get used to it, rather than the like, how does that feel? Crappy. Okay, never mind. Go back to your bad position. So it's not that I think that people need to like know how they feel, and I don't want to get that information from the athlete. It's just that slight change in the phrasing that's going to dictate what we actually do with that.
One of my favorite, if you get to know your athletes, and sometimes you can tell who's going to give you that pushback. Like the person who asked this question, I think it was Katie. When Katie asked that question, she's probably got a very specific athlete in mind, right? And so when I'm going up to that athlete and going to deliver a cue, I almost always follow it up with, I know this feels weird, but trust me, it's going to help you, right?
Yeah, like, check this out. Yeah.
I know this feels weird, but trust me, this is going to help you. And, and then more often than not, people are willing to give it a try.
Yeah. And if they're really pushing back and it's not dangerous, I might, for the day, like if I've asked them, they said no, I've been like, humor me, do it for 2 reps. They do it for 2 reps. We go, then I give them a break. They go back to the different stance. I'm like, hey, are you not going to try anymore? And they're like, nah. I'm like, all right, as long as it's not dangerous, it's probably, I'm going to continue to try to work on that going forward, but it's not going to be the end of the world in that place. Now, in addition, so I would say that the most common thing that I see with squats is people that squat with their feet too narrow. Yeah. Like more often than not, if somebody is losing their neutral spine, oftentimes it's because their feet are too narrow. If they're super immature with their chest, it's because their feet are too narrow. If they're not getting to depth, it's because their feet are too narrow and they're not pushing their knees out hard enough, right? When it comes to any time somebody has a barbell in their hand, what's the most common thing you see going wrong? And I don't know if I'm phrasing
with a squat
very well. What's that?
With a squat or
not with a squat? Well, even with a squat, but anything like a shoulder press, a push press, push jerk, even a thruster. As soon as the bar gets in their hand, similar to what we talked about with the stance in the squat, do you notice anything consistently with back to our most important?
Yeah, like too narrow.
Yeah, and so where are they grabbing the bar more often than not?
Like on top of their shoulders, at shoulder width.
And if you look at the barbell, that's typically right where the smooth and rough part meet.
Right. Yes, and exactly. And this part of the hand is right meeting the smooth.
Yes. Yeah. And as soon as you do that, and it even might be technically outside the shoulders, but if my hands are that close on the barbell, in order to navigate my face, I either have to press the bar way out and around my face, or I have to press early. And most of the time it's both. And so as soon as, we get to the end of day one at the level 1, and if any of you guys haven't taken the level 1, here's a hint, and I hate to ruin this for you. You're going to be doing thrusters in the workout. As soon as we get to that point and we start teaching thrusters, and I look, 50% of the people in there are grabbing the bar right at the rough and smooth part, and I'm like, I know what's going to happen. We're going to press early on the way out of this thing. We're going to loop out and around our face, and so I'm going to make that same suggestion that I had with the stance, where I'm going to go up and I'm going to be like, hey. And I teach this, and I'm so dramatic in teaching this. I have people pick the bar up to their waist. Guys, find the rough and smooth part, go a full thumb's length away.
Yeah.
Now grab it and go from there. And then when I find the people that start inching their hands back in, then it's like, all right, hey, Pete, this is going to feel really, really weird, but just try this for a few reps for me. I know it's going to feel awful because it's going to be so different, but I promise it's going to help. I need you the next time you grab the bar to go a thumb's length away from this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always wondering why people do that. And I think maybe it's because, when you bring your hands narrower, also hanging, and that's another thing, hanging movements. People go often way too narrow.
Hanging from the pull-up bar, or like hanging?
Yeah, hanging from a pull-up bar.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yes, like too narrow on the pull-up, and then they can't, and then someone's has the capacity to try a chest to bar now, and they're like, why can't I get a chest to bar? And the hands are like, thumbs are touching almost on the pull-up bar. But the one thing I experienced was, I'm a heavy guy, and hanging, doing lots of toes to bar. I've got the ab endurance, but the grip endurance I don't. So actually going narrow gives me more grip strength or just prolongs my fatigue. And then, so I think that might be the same reason why people do that with the barbell, is they go narrower because they're just like, okay, this is more comfortable to just hold on to it here, and then the overhead position, once it's up there, if they have the flexibility, that narrow grip will just be more stable, like a handstand, right? But they just don't have the experience about doing the front rack position or the range of motion and all the other points of performance to have that insight. Like I have to be a little wider, right? But to them, they're just like, this feels easier now, but they still need to learn the rest of the movement.
Yeah, and in my mind, I'm like, it just naturally looks like the place where you grab it. In my head,
right? I don't that's true. That's true too. It, right? That's yeah. Oh, there's a big line right here.
Yeah, there's a line. That must be it. And when we're teaching the movements with the PVC pipe, oftentimes we just go, hey guys, grab the bar outside of your hips. And it's like, that's roughly where it would be. It's technically outside of your hips, but it's still too narrow. But I actually just saw something posted about like the slightly different width of your hands on the pull-up bar based on what you're doing, like toes to bar more narrow, regular pull-up, just shoulder width, and then chest to bar a little bit wider. I know I've played with like wider for the chest to bar, obviously to give the ability to get your chest to the bar, but I've not ever really played with a more narrow for toes to bar. So it was interesting hearing that. And in my mind, with my coaching and even for me as an athlete, like in my mind, consistency just streamlines things and makes it easy. Oh, yeah. If I know that every time I'm going to grab the barbell, I'm always a thumb's length away from the smooth part. That's for my front squats. It's for my shoulder press, my push jerk. That's where I'm going to clean from. That's where I'm going to deadlift from. And so I think the same thing on the pull-up bar. Hey, this is my grip. This is what I'm going to do. Unless I do that maybe tweak for a wider grip for chest to bars, but otherwise it's roughly the same. That in my mind, like I said, is just the consistency makes it easy. You can make an argument that, hey, the more narrow grip is going to allow your grip to last longer and you to do more toes to bar. People can make the argument that by bringing our hands in closer and maybe grabbing the smooth and rough part right where they meet for the deadlift is going to shorten the range of motion. And I'm like, okay, you can make that argument, but when I'm coaching at my gym, I'm probably not going to worry about that nuance because my athletes can't remember where to put their feet every single day, much less the different grip for the deadlift compared to the clean, compared to the snatch, compared to the, and that goes in line with like the hip setup for the deadlift compared to the snatch, compared to the clean. I'm like, we don't have clean setups and snatch setups. Outside of the snatch setup is lower because your hands are wider.
Yep.
Like, yes, some advanced athletes that might be valuable for, but coaching general pop, I don't think it's necessary at this level. And it's like, we as coaches love the nuance of this stuff. And we probably geek out about this way more than our athletes do. Yep. I just think it's unfair to try to make my mom memorize the hip position for her clean compared to her deadlift.
Yeah, I agree. Just grab the bar in the same time, or grab the bar in the same spot every time. That's what I was trying to say. Okay, here, switching gears out of the common movement themes for a second, back to the 9 foundational movements. Air squat, the foundational of all foundational movements. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, 100%.
And what, so in your mind, when you think about that statement, it's the most foundational of all foundational movements. What makes it so? Is it that learning it helps you execute those movement patterns or points of performance on all the other ones? Is it that when you get really good at air squats, it makes it easier to do the other ones? It might be both, or maybe there's another reason in there that you think uniquely makes it so foundational.
I mean, not always, but I often joke, like at level 1s and things like that it's like, hey, you want anything in your life, like in the gym, work on your air squat, right? You improve your air squat, your overhead squat's going to get better. Your snatch is going to get better. Your clean's going to get better. It's like, you want to learn how to climb the rope? Let's work on your air squat. You want to get better at pull-ups? Let's work on your air squat. You want to go on more dates? Let's work on your air squat. You want more money in your bank account? Air squat's going to help you with that. I think all of that stuff is true, but like, that's true in the gym of like, hey, the better that squat gets, the more upright you are, the better you get your knees over your toes. All of that stuff is going to make so many things we do, wall ball shots, snatches, clean, so much easier. But I think at the foundational of all foundational, like, that's the thing that when you lose that capacity, life's going to get really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, like currently, and I think I was talking to Ackerman about this a couple months ago, where I was like, dude, me waking up in the morning, like I've got some things going on with like my hips and some muscles and some things where it's like cold turkey out of bed, like doing an air squat in the morning isn't as easy as it should be. And that's bothering me. Like that's an issue. There should be no reason that I need to warm up to do an air squat. Like that is very frustrating and shows me that there's some issues going on that I need to do some additional things, because that thing is just should be so automatic, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's what I look at it. It's like, yep, air squat's going to make you better in the gym. Air squat's going to make your life easier. Air squat, when it goes away, life's going to get hard.
100%. And it's so true. And back to what we were saying before, like it's easy to say it and understand that it could be true, but then until you see it happen and manifest itself over the course of like an athlete's progression, and you're like, wow, they really have gotten better at the air squat, and that's what's leading them to be better at all these other things. Like, you know, for me, the overhead squat and the squat snatch, those two things since the very beginning have always been my weakness. I've always sucked at them. And the less I work on my air squat, and specifically the maturity of it, like doing squat therapy. So if I don't practice squat therapy, my overhead squat suffers like crazy. And then as a result, my squat snatch will suffer like crazy, right? And then the trickle down effect is nuts. But then coaching, I run a seniors class at my gym, and coaching the seniors class, I've had about 4 or 5 of them consistently for a year and a half. And the thing that I start to notice about seniors is a lot of them, because they, you know, everything in life, it like sits on the ground, right? They get things on the ground, they got to pick up the backpack, whatever it is. They're not terrible deadlifters. Like hip hinging isn't their greatest weakness. And a lot of them have decent back strength. You know, there are exceptions, and some have like osteoporosis and stuff, but generally that movement pattern and then the ability to just pick something up off the ground, that's not where they've lost their functional capacity. It's the squat. And so some of them, you know, we started a year and a half ago having them squat to a 30-inch box, like literally just barely baby squats, like just learning some of the mechanics, and that's their range of motion. You know, now this woman who was at a 30-inch box, now she can get her hip we're almost below parallel a year and a half later, you know, and where literally she had you know, a neurological issue with her leg where she couldn't lift her leg off the ground. Just from working that air squat, now she can jump with 2 feet. Like, yes, we're working on jumping a little bit, but the air squat is a daily thing, and that it's crazy. So it speaks to exactly what you're talking about of how it's life-giving. It seems like an exaggeration and almost silly to say, but it's completely changed her life.
Yeah, and it's like cool. It's awesome to see that happen in the gym, but you know, like how much easier life is outside of the gym. I'm like, I guarantee you, just getting off the couch after watching your show to go make dinner or to get in bed is easier, which makes life better.
Yeah.
Right. Less laborious doing any and all of that kind of stuff. And that's the type of stuff that gets me super fired up, is when I see athletes like their movement improve over time. That's what gets me super fired up.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at a lot of the original girl workouts, many of those have air squats in them. They're all variations of Cindy, or you get Chelsea and all these run, right? I personally think that there's a lack of air squatting in the CrossFit gyms nowadays. Like I'm now gonna double down and start putting more in the warm-ups, because in the Metcons I'm seeing a you know, less than I'd like to see. But the early days, right, crazy numbers of air squats.
Well, there's nothing, in my opinion, more devastating than high volume, like a high intensity, like high volume, high speed air squats in a workout. Like I'm sore from Cindy or Barbara or things like that, more so than like 1 rep max day, maybe like 20 rep max day or 10 rep max day, a true 5x5 at like 85, 90%, you're pretty darn sore. But like you get me to do Cindy where I'm actually pushing the gas pedal down and going for it.
Yeah.
I can't walk tomorrow. Like my legs are so freaking sore and it's crazy, right? Yeah. There's so much fitness, like Tabata squats. Yeah.
Oh man. Don't wait until Murph prep to start doing your air squats. It's like 365 days a year is Murph prep. Get those air squats in on a weekly basis, you know?
Yeah, I think that's it. Like to your point, we do benchmarks at my gym every year, and every year there is some version of a Cindy style workout that is part of our air squat, like the push-up, pull-up, air squat foundation. Like I'm completely convinced that you could do those three things in different like rep schemes and formats and time domains and get all the fitness that you want from now until eternity.
Yep.
You know, you can't really mess that one up. So
those who are interested in this program that looks like that, go back to 2019 January. Greg was programming.com.
Yeah,
and that was the launch of the interesting website with all the CrossFit health stuff. But he started programming.com, and almost every week there was some variation of Cindy, strict, L-sit, this and that. Like, you know, it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah. The early days, I remember going to like kids' playgrounds and doing Angie and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm sure people were like, what is this adult guy doing swinging around on the jungle gym with his shirt off? Like, I'm not going to let my kids go to the park today.
Yeah, exactly.
But with that, man, this has been fun. We've enjoyed you guys jumping on this thing. If you guys aren't a part of the knowledge, we've got a great offer for you. 20% off your first month. Just go to the knowledge and use best hour live as the code. We'll get you guys into this thing. We look forward to doing more of these. We're going to have Pete with us. We're going to have Kristin with us. We're going to have more of the coach dev team and some other guests along the way. And we will be talking anything and everything coaching. So if there's any topics or questions that you guys have, please bring them to any of these live calls. And we look forward to seeing you guys a week from now. So appreciate you jumping on with us, spending your morning. Look forward to seeing you next time. Pete, always a pleasure, my man.
Always a pleasure, sir.
All right, guys. Thanks.